guess we can start.
Good morning, everybody. We continuing our work of the international conference in University of Belgrade, Faculty of Law, co-sponsored, co-organizing MGIMO University, and our international conference is titled "Current International Legal Regime of Natural Resources of Celestial Bodies: The Impact of Legislative Innovations." And I'm happy to introduce you, my old friend, who is a professor and of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, who was for a number of years the director of Science Diplomacy Center in MGIMO University, who was also as far as I understand, Paul, if I'm not correct, please correct me, who was also the director of a very important institution in the Norwegian University in Tromsø. Professor Berkman was also the director of a very important international research project regarding the multidisciplinary researches, and he was also the director of the Arctic project, very important, and 3 books were published under his leadership, I would say, and one of them was devoted to the principle of science diplomacy. And Professor Berkman, I would assure you that your book, together, I believe, with a number of colleagues relating to the science diplomacy, is already in the library of MGIMO University. So even when we have different opinions regarding this or that aspect, we always discuss it, and in fact the results of our research cooperation were a number of research papers devoted to international law, to science diplomacy, to international policy. I might also add that his course on the science diplomacy and Arctic in MGIMO University was one of the most successful courses and were highly appreciated by students. Professor Berkman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Vylegzhanin. Alexander is far too modest. The cooperation that we have and have had for the past 10 years is in large tribute to his very careful, rigorous, and precise international legal framing of the discussions. And Alexander didn't mention, Professor Vylegzhanin didn't mention, but we began our journey with NATO and Russia, the first formal dialogue between NATO and Russia when I was at the University of Cambridge in 2010. And it has been that spirit of cooperation among allies and adversaries alike, but always thinking in terms of how do we address issues that enable and facilitate peaceful use of the world we live in, as well as outer space and beyond. I'm able to share slides, Professor, is that correct, I think?
Yes.
It says I cannot share content. If I can share my slides, I will be honored to continue with this, but if not, I'll be extemporaneous.
Just a moment, we need to make you a presenter.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Then you'll be able to just...
It's an honor and pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss outer space law with esteemed colleagues in Belgrade. I've not yet been to Serbia, but hope the opportunity arises at one point in the future.
Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. So I believe you can see my screen now.
Yes,
at this point.
Starting, yes, we can.
Okay, I will start my PowerPoint then. Let's see. Okay, slideshow from beginning. From beginning. Okay. Can you see my slides? Let's see.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Swap presenter. Is this better? Full
Yes,
screen?
better.
Okay, very good. So what I'd like to try and discuss today, and I understand I have about 25 minutes. Is that correct? Correct, Alexander?
Correct.
Okay, very good. I'd like to be helpful and in the context of a discussion as much as anything. So today I'd like to talk about science, diplomacy, and international cooperation in outer space. And this picture itself clearly is taken from outer space. And we see the world that we live in, the Earth system on a planetary scale below us. If we think about the Earth and we think about the world that we live in, there's some simple observations, not complex at all. About 30% of the Earth's surface on a planetary scale is occupied by nations, nation states, that collectively can be characterized in terms of national interests. And the reality is that nations will always look after national interests first and foremost. So one area of component of our world is clearly national interests, and it occupies 30% of the Earth in terms of recognized boundaries, jurisdictions. The other 70% of the Earth's surface falls beyond the boundaries of nations in areas that have been collectively characterized under international law as international spaces. International spaces also includes outer space. The international spaces collectively represent common interests, the common interests of all on Earth today and into the distant future. And if we look at the Earth on a planetary scale and we consider national interests and common interests, the challenge that we face as a world, as a globally interconnected civilization, forever, is one of balancing national interests and common interests. This is our fundamental challenge as a civilization, today and forever after, as long as there are nations, the challenge of balancing national interests and common interests. And this is what I'd like to discuss with you today in the context of outer space. Just for definition, I mentioned science, diplomacy, and it becomes inappropriate to use terms without being specific. So science diplomacy itself is a language of hope. It is a process. It's a holistic process, international, interdisciplinary, and inclusive. And by far the most difficult challenge with any dialogue, with any negotiation, is one of being inclusive, to consider who, what, when, where, why, and how. This process of science diplomacy involves informed decision-making, which I'll go over, to balance national interest and common interest for the benefit of all on Earth across generations. And it's across generations, forever. The issues of outer space, the issues of sustainable development, the issues of peaceful use of the Earth and all of the resources, these are issues that will be with us forever. The challenges are that we live in a world with capabilities for mass destruction by our own means. And this is the challenge that legal systems have the opportunity and responsibility to help mitigate, the risks of instabilities, to mitigate the security challenges that will always plague nations, cities, states, and the world we live in. The question I pose to you as a team, per se, so consider that we're all working together in the same direction. Why did the United States and the Soviet Union, two superpower adversaries, why did these superpower adversaries cooperate continuously in outer space and Antarctica throughout the Cold War, despite the animosities that isolated them everywhere else? So we clearly understand that we went through a Cold War period. And I would say one of the issues the world has yet to recognize is the United States and the Soviet Union, despite their animus and despite their being adversaries, together, they prevented another world war, a world war that would have been with nuclear weapons. The United States and the Soviet Union together accomplished that. It wasn't by one party alone. And I don't think the world yet discusses the cooperation that was evident throughout the Cold War between these two superpower adversaries, despite their politics and motivations elsewhere. The United States and the Soviet Union cooperated continuously in outer space and Antarctica throughout the Cold War. And the question I ask to you is why? Why did they do that? What enabled the United States and the Soviet Union to cooperate continuously in these two regions, despite the animosity that isolated them everywhere else on Earth? If we go back to the 1950s, before we ever went into outer space, it was clear that the entry into outer space was rockets. And in the period of the 1950s, the rockets that would be used to convey any object into outer space beyond the Earth's orbit would have been a rocket that would have also had the same use for ballistic missiles. So remember, in the 1950s, ballistic missiles didn't exist. In the early 1950s, humankind had never been in outer space. It was an imagination. So consider that time period, going back to the 1950s, when humankind had just left a period of global conflict, the Second World War, when the United States and the Soviet Union were allies, by the way. So in the context of this discussion, I want to put a historical flavor on this because it's relevant today and forever after this context. And out of that discussion in the 1950s came the very first U.S. space policy in 1955. So if we're talking about international law and we're talking about how to frame international law, a component of it is certainly the guidance and the flavor of discussion that emerges from nations that are participating in the negotiation. In the 1950s, the very, very first U.S. space law was a National Security Council statement. And this statement says that they were looking for a program of small scientific satellites could be developed from existing missile programs already underway within the Department of Defense. So they recognized that a satellite in orbit, the beginning of outer space, the beginning to use outer space for peaceful purposes, was this very first memo in 1955, well before Sputnik, well before any of these discussions. It was in the United States. I don't know what the Russian equivalent is in terms of the history, but this is a statement from the United States, the National Security Council, 5520. At that time, the International Geophysical Year, which was positioned in 1957-58, affords an excellent opportunity to mesh a scientific satellite program with a cooperative worldwide geophysical observation program. So the origin of these space laws was science. It was together with science that the United States and the Soviet Union began their journey of cooperation in Antarctica and outer space. And it was recognized in 1955 that there would be considerable prestige and psychological benefit accruing to the nation which is first successful in launching a satellite. And this goes into the entire space history, the space race, the beginning of Sputnik, the first US satellites, and so on. But I just introduced this because the context of international law in outer space starts with these very first space policies of nations. And there were other discussions. It was clearly a period of significant turmoil, military turmoil, lack of trust, not too dissimilar to today. And the United States, there was a discussion to have a open skies agreement, to think in terms of outer space. This was in 1955 as well. So the United States had just launched a national security strategy. The same year, there was a discussion between Nikita Khrushchev and President Eisenhower about outer space. It was an early attempt to build a dialogue. It wasn't so much a strategy to come up with a forever solution. It was just simply to build a dialogue. It didn't work. but it was a start. And those discussions eventually emerged into treaties and conventions. If we think about the time period of all of these things going on, this 1950s, the context of these early discussions, we look at the 20th century. Clearly, the first half of the 20th century is marked by animosity among nations, world wars. These were not regional wars. They weren't continental wars. They were world wars on a planetary scale. And I would argue that as individuals, one among 8 billion of us on Earth, we all, whatever we do, whether we're legal scholars, lawyers, scientists, politicians, artists, whoever we are, all 8 billion of us have a responsibility together, forever, to prevent another period of world war. That is our calling as a civilization. And if we look at the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century was marked by animosity among nations. The second half of the 20th century can be viewed more optimistically, more hopefully, because of international law. And the international law during the second half of the 20th century accelerated in terms of international legal regimes, in this case shown in terms of environmental treaties and conventions. Again, if we look at the 20th century, the first half can be characterized in terms of national interests. Nations, believing their national interests were preeminent on a planetary scale, was what caused World War. And if we think about that in just basic, simple terms, the underlying root causes of World War was nationalism. So whenever we see nationalism in the world, it's a risk to our stability as a globally interconnected civilization. The second half of the 20th century can be characterized with more hope and optimism in the sense of common interest, that nations, whoever they were identifying common interests and building treaties and conventions accordingly. In that period, there were 4 regions that were formally designated under international law as being beyond sovereign jurisdictions. Those regions were the high seas. The first treaty convention dealing with a region beyond national jurisdictions was the high seas, beyond sovereign jurisdictions. The second was the Antarctic Treaty. The third was the Outer Space, Moon, and Celestial Bodies in 1967. And the fourth was the Deep Sea in 1971. All of these treaties and conventions specifically identified that there were regions beyond national jurisdictions and established international spaces. So when we think about outer space, when we go into the future in terms of legal regimes and management and strategies and rules of the road for the use of outer space, those early days set in motion guidance, wisdom that emerged after the world wars of the 20th century. That wisdom after the world wars of the 20th century has progressively been eroded. The leaders that were alive at that time are no longer alive. The people that were negotiating those early treaties and conventions have forgotten the relevance of nationalism and the risks it poses to world peace and stability. And so it is in this context that I share my observations with you about outer space. If we look at outer space today and where it's going, so this is the trajectory, the annual number of objects launched into space. From 1957, from the very first object, which was Sputnik, to great credit to the Soviet Union, the very first object humankind launched into space was Sputnik, the satellite Sputnik. If we look at from 1957 to the present, we can clearly see that right now, in 2023, the world is accelerating its launching of satellites and rockets and other objects into outer space. This is the trajectory we are on as a civilization. Private companies, governments, they're all getting into the game about the use of outer space. And the challenge, the legal challenge, is to come up with strategies that ensure that outer space will forever remain a region of peaceful use. This is the challenge of law, to make sure that those early observations of the 1960s continue into the distant future among allies and adversaries alike. The challenges are severe. We have geopolitical dynamics of outer space, and it is accelerating in the same sense that the number of objects that are increasing in outer space is increasing. We can see just in the last few months, in July, Russia says it will quit the International Space Station, as reported on National Public Radio. India has gone to the moon successfully. China is doubling the size of its space station. There's all kinds of ways to present this in the media, to think about the use of outer space, but I like to think of it in terms of hope and inspiration, the challenge for us to work together as a globally interconnected civilization among allies and adversaries alike. And the Russian Soyuz with 2 cosmonauts, the US astronaut, docks at the International Space Station, as reported by Al Jazeera last month on the 16th of September. And their notion was that the International Space Station remains a venue for cooperation between the United States and Russia, even during the period of tension over Ukraine. And this is the challenge. There will always be geopolitical dynamics. During the Cold War, there were other issues and regions around the world that compromised dialogue, but the Antarctic and outer space throughout that period remained a dialogue because of science as a tool, but it remained because of a focus. And that focus throughout that period was based on common interests. And just to further illustrate the sensitivity of this nationalism that exists, these are the very first space policies of the United States from the 1950s. And these types of discussions are going on in the background. They're secret discussions, but they exist. And they will forever exist at the highest levels of government to make decisions about how a government operates into the future. In this image, you can see statements that were produced in the National Security Council for the President of the United States. These were secret and eyes-only type of discussions in the 1950s. And after 50 years, have been declassified. But the importance of that is to understand the essence of the relationship between the decisions and legal framework for outer space and the use of outer space for national purposes. And this is the juxtaposition. This is where science diplomacy comes into play to balance national interests and common interests. And you can see from the very, very beginning in 1955, even though Khrushchev and Eisenhower were meeting, in the background, there were these discussions about intercontinental ballistic missiles in Antarctica, stockpiles, budgets, Antarctica nuclear weapons. And progressively in 1958, you can see space policy emerging into this discussion. This is the world we live in. There are realities of how nations operate, but the challenge of international law, as opposed to national law, international law involves dialogues among allies and adversaries alike. And the real problems emerge when nations stop talking with each other. That's when the problems arise. As long as there's dialogue, as long as there's a continuous discussion to consider the use and the problems and opportunities, everything will be fine. The problems arise in the absence of dialogues. And this is where we come into the context of international law. So this is the international law of common interests. I don't know whether such a framework exists, but it's an evolving international law of common interests, and it exists. It exists in treaties and conventions that have been produced since the Second World War. And I'm sure that there's a historical context for this as well, when it wasn't the international legal frameworks of the United Nations. But if we go to the Charter of the United Nations itself, they talk in terms of common interests and common ends. The Antarctic Treaty talks about matters of common interest. The Treaty on the Principles Governing the Activities of States and the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, talks about common interests of all mankind. Those common interests are forever. Treaty on the Prohibition of Emplacement of Nuclear Weapons on the Seafloor from 1971, which created the international space of the deep sea, also talked about the common interest of mankind, as did the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the common heritage of mankind. And then there's many others, but if we go to the 1992 conventions that emerged from the Rio Conference, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, common concern of humankind. Same thing with the Convention on Biologic Diversity, common concern of humankind. The issue that involves international law involves common interests in outer space. The challenges exist when the treaties are negotiated only from the position of national interests. And this is where science diplomacy comes into the discussion. In legal discussions, in military discussions, in domestic policies, it comes into the discussion of how do we balance national interests and common interests, not just for the moment, but forever, for the stability and peace of the world we live in as a globally interconnected civilization. And so in thinking about this, I'd like to conclude by sharing strategy with you. So you're legal scholars, and I know from working with Professor Vylegzhanin that a component of international law is precision. To be precise with international law, to take the complexities that exist in terms of nationalism and national policies and to turn it into legal frameworks with the precision to operate with continuity in a practical way, not just paper dialogues, paper agreements, but practical, real-world solutions that are cast in the framework of international law. And in a sense, the challenge that we face in terms of developing sustainable solutions in the world, on one hand, involves international governance mechanisms, treaties, conventions, policies, and on the other hand, involves built infrastructure. The two together, the built infrastructure and the governance mechanisms, go hand in hand in terms of how do we balance national interests and common interests. The reason we're discussing these issues in outer space is because the use of outer space, the infrastructure, is accelerating. You could see the number of objects that are being launched into outer space is increasing exponentially. So if we think about this dynamic, on one end of the scale, at the time scale of nations and their geopolitics, are security issues, issues that deal with urgencies, risks of political, economic, cultural instabilities. These are immediate. And nations will always have security issues because they understand, they view, they imagine risks of instability, political, economic, cultural. And security at any level, environmental security, food security, climate security, whatever it is, the reason it's a security risk is because of risks of instability that are viewed from the perspective of jurisdictions. National jurisdictions, international jurisdictions, and even subnational jurisdictions. The challenge that we face also as a world operates across sustainability timescales, similarly trying to balance economic, societal, environmental considerations, but across generations. The fundamental feature of sustainable development is intergenerational. The challenge we face as a world is really one of operating across a continuum of urgencies to address the concerns of nations on one hand, which are immediate in terms of security timescale, and at the same time to address issues that are of common interest at a sustainability timescale. So in thinking about the treaties and conventions that have been produced since the 1950s, following the Second World War, on one hand, the negotiation strategy is revealed as well. Nations think and operate in terms of conflict predominantly. We can see this in the world today. All of the orientation, the media, the discussion, it's conflict. Conflict is a polarizing, paralyzing type of dialogue that isn't hopeful. And if you think about the young people in the world, your children, grandchildren, your friends that are young, they're being debilitated. Their hope is being removed because everything is seen in terms of conflict. The world is going to fall apart, the gloom and the doom. That's the immediate type of circumstance, the emotion that's translated, accelerated because of social media. But at the same time, as a world, we have responsibility to negotiate strategies that operate into the future in terms of common interests. And so if we think about a negotiation strategy, on one hand, there's conflict resolution, and every institution in every country, in all the ministries of foreign affairs around the world, bread and butter involves with conflict resolution strategies. And I train dozens of governments at the level of ministries of foreign affairs and their diplomatic academies. And I can say for sure that there's a great emphasis on conflict resolution and very little understanding, if at all, about strategies to build common interest building strategies. There is a choice that exists at the beginning of any negotiation, like a glass that's half full or half empty. Both are correct. Indeed, the glass is half full and the glass is half empty. It's a choice that's up to an individual. In the context of negotiations, there's similarly a choice at the beginning of any negotiation, to begin from a position of conflict or to begin from a position of common interests. So I asked at the beginning, why did the United States and the Soviet Union cooperate continuously in Antarctica and outer space throughout the Cold War, despite the animosities that isolated them everywhere else? And the observation is that it wasn't science. Science was a tool of diplomacy. It enabled these allies and adversaries to work together. Answer why is the starting point of their dialogue. In outer space and in Antarctica, the starting point of the dialogue between these two superpower adversaries was common interests. It's a choice. I say this to you because you are international legal scholars, experts that are involved in these types of discussions. Understanding that you have a choice in terms of how you orient the precision that goes into international law is important. You can begin from a position of conflict and continuously try and resolve conflict from the perspective of these different national interests. Or you can start from a position of common interests and build common interests as a consequence. The simple observation, is that the starting point determines the journey. If you start from a position of conflict, the journey is filled with conflict. If you start from a position of common interests, the journey is filled with cooperation. Both conflict resolution and common interest building, two negotiation strategies, have the same end goal in mind, ultimately, to promote cooperation and prevent conflict. But the journeys are entirely different. So I share this with you in the sense of trying to be helpful. This is not an academic dialogue when we're talking about outer space. The future of humanity will increasingly involve outer space. At the end of the day, the challenge we face as a world, now and forever, is one of making informed decisions. Not good decisions or bad decisions, right decisions or wrong decisions, but informed decisions, decisions that optimize the available information that exists, recognizing the questions change over time. And to this extent, trying to simplify the problems that we have as a world. An informed decision, by definition, operates across a continuum of urgencies, short to long term. And in the context of nations, peoples, and our world, that continuum of urgencies extends from security timescales to sustainability timescales. Understanding the framework of the discussion, the context of the international legal precision that's required to operate across generations is a challenge. This is the challenge that requires the creativity, sense of passion, and responsibility all 8 billion of us have, especially for those of you who are international legal experts that help in crafting those strategies that will use these international spaces for peaceful purposes only. Thank you very much. It's an honor and pleasure to contribute.
Many thanks, Professor Berkman. Questions, please. Yes, please. Microphone, yes.
Yes, okay. So I have a question. We always talk about cooperation between superpowers that have technical possibilities to go to space. We always talk about resoluting conflicts, and we always talk about peacefulness in space. However, from sustainability and environmental point of view, throughout history and throughout the boom of launching many new probes to space, there has been a significant issue with polluting the entry into space. So, the pollution of entry that creates those little flying objects that can pierce through any object that flies into space kind of creates a gateway through to space. So nowadays, only the superpowers that have enough technically advanced rockets can launch a rocket into space. That creates a big economical gap for technical development for other countries that have yet not found a way to create something to launch into space. So I want to ask you, from the sustainability point of view, is there any regulation and liability, because we have closing entrance into space? Who is going to be held liable, because all the objects that were sent from the competing sense, and they were never being careful about polluting the space and creating a huge gap for other countries to launch their missions into space. So is there any regulation on that, or is there anybody who is going to be responsible for blocking other countries out, even though if it is maybe like unwillingly so?
Thank you very much for your questions. Before Professor Berkman takes decision how to address it, I just want to say that according to our program, this session we have the third speaker, Valentin Uvarov, who is an expert who is an expert in this issue, and I believe that he might further develop his vision. How should we address the ecological issues of outer space activity? Since he is really an expert, specifically his research is devoted to environmental issues of the outer space activity. But of course, I give the floor to Professor Berkman, whether you are inclined to say something about this general environmental issue and sustainability of the activity
in the outer space.
Sure, with honor. Thank you for your question. I'd like to take you on a journey in responding to your question. So you've asked a question, so there's clearly an educational component. You want an answer. That's fine, but in a sense, the question you asked, perhaps in terms of yourself, reflects a level of passion and sincere insight question that requires a more detailed investigation, knowledge discovery. Well, that relates to research. And so, in a sense, you've begun a journey. You know, I can give you an answer. I'm sure it's not as clean as the one that would be provided by the expert that will speak in following me. There's a research component, but at the end of the day, if you're going to become a legal scholar, a legal expert, a contributor to the discussion, you have to lead. And so imagine the journey that you're asking this question about pollutants in outer space, about all of the flying debris that circles the Earth. And you've identified that this is something that affects every rocket that goes into space. If you've seen satellites, I mean, they're made out of very fine material to be torn apart in the confines of space. So space debris, for example, is a threat to every space vehicle that is orbiting the Earth. The uncontrolled increase of space debris concerns everybody that puts rockets into space, hurling around the Earth at thousands of miles per second. This is the challenge we face. It's a common interest. So you can start from a position of, well, we've got this out there and we can have dialogue between the advanced countries that can solve it and the ones that are developing the solutions, and there's a difference. And that you've already begun a dialogue of conflict. You've made a decision between who's included and who's excluded. The challenge here is to think in terms of common interest. The challenge is to think in terms of inclusion, the problems that are collectively faced by everybody. Space debris is one of them. Certainly for the effective use of outer space, space debris is a challenge. And it potentially will compromise the Earth system and everybody below us, below those orbiting objects at some point in the future in the ways we don't even understand yet, because we haven't even begun to ask those questions. So the orientation of your question in terms of an answer, just giving you a simple answer, is just a starting point. That's education per se. But to really dig into your question yourself, you have to do this yourself. You have to set in motion a process of research to think more seriously, deeply about what are the questions that relate to that are of common interest as well as conflict. Where do you begin? What type of approach do you take? What are the solutions? What are the gaps that exist in those international legal frameworks? And ultimately, with that research and that knowledge that you generate, you become more capable to introduce into the international framework, to lead solutions that will solve that problem, because you're dealing with questions of common concern. And I can tell you, as an individual, dealing with allies and adversaries around the world at the highest levels of government, presidents and prime ministers, admirals and generals, parliaments, and so on. If you try and tell these individuals where they're going, what they should do, they'll shut their ears and kick you out of the room, and you'll never be invited back. If you think in terms of questions of common concern, you can build common interests. If you orient your question around in terms of what are the common interests to address space pollution, you will have a much more fruitful dialogue in solving that with colleagues, whether they're allies or adversaries, in terms of solutions that will have direct and lasting effect.
Next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions, or probably we shall put the questions until the end of our session, and there might be a discussion at that period. No objections? By consensus, we have adopted such a decision. So our next speaker is, many thanks, Professor Berkman, once again. I always like the way you present your vision of international law, which is not as it is reflected in the textbooks of international law in universities, but which is really very, very attractive, especially when you say that international law means a dialogue, and that is really very attractive. And your theory of informed decisions is really very perspective, in my opinion. Once again, thank you very much.
Pleasure and honor, Alexander.
Yes, and our next speaker is Milan Stojanović, Astronomical Observatory in Belgrade. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting us and letting us talk about a little bit different idea. But generally speaking, and especially at the end of my lecture, I will devote some time also to the resources, not just the data that is currently let's say the biggest interest for us at the Astronomical Observatory. So I will talk about connecting Serbia to the world trends of satellite industry through the launch of first Serbian scientific satellite. You can see the group of people, all of them are my colleagues, some from Astronomical Observatory and some from Faculty of Mathematics and Faculty of Mechanical Engineering. But before I start talking about satellites, I would like just to say a few words about the home institution from where I'm coming from. The Astronomical Observatory of Belgrade was founded in 1887, so we have a very long tradition. And we developed through time. At this moment, we are currently covering all areas of astronomical research. And finally, as a one milestone for especially important for this talk, for this conference, and is founding of two new units at the Astronomical Observatory, Unit for Space Research and Technologies and Unit for Monitoring Solar Activity, Climate Change and Light Pollution. These two units were founded, as you can see, just a month ago. And I will talk a little bit more about the goals of the first unit mentioned here, which I am leading also. But before that, a few nice pictures of old observatory. On the top left picture, you can see the first building of the observatory from 130 years ago. Then a few more images how the observatory changed. I must say that at the beginning we were together with the meteorological and seismological observatory. And here you can see building, maybe even you can recognize, this is today where meteorological observatory is located, but at the time of 1891, we actually moved from the first building on the left to this building here. Another important date for the Astronomical Observatory was in 1932, when on a hill called Vylegzhanin, which is presented here, we started building the new observatory, which was far away at that time from light pollution from the city of Belgrade. But today this hill, Vylegzhanin, is called Zvezdara because the observatory was built at that point, and of course, old Serbian word for observatory was Zvezdarnica, so the whole hill and today municipality is called Zvezdara. Here are some other pictures from 1932, and one interesting picture, especially related with satellite technology and today's space industry. On the left, you can see the photo of the Astronomical Observatory from 1932 taken from the airplane. The buildings are clearly visible, and on the right side, you can see a picture from the satellite from just 2 years ago. The buildings are marked here with the numbers. For example, this here marked with number 2. This is our biggest instrument that we have, the biggest telescope at the observatory. The dome is somewhere around 12 meters in diameter. And you can see that it had some small windows at the first time when it was built. On the right side, you can see the image from satellite. You can see a lot of forest now, which was planted later. And what I want to show you, just how much the satellite industry advanced, is that this image was taken in 2021. And on the north side of the dome for the telescope, you can see some dark areas, shades. It's actually a corrosion of the dome. Just a year later, our observatory started with the renovation of this building, and you can clearly see now the new repainted dome without any damages, you know, the dark areas and so on. So the satellite industry really advanced a lot, and we are trying to keep up with all the technology that is developing in this area. Here you can see a modern observatory. In the lower right, you can see our biggest telescope that we use today for the observations. It's located at Mountain Vylegzhanin near Prokuplje. It's not anymore on Zvezdara because, again, we have a strong light pollution there, which is preventing us from the observations. So there was an idea a few years ago that my colleague Luka Popović with Dušan Marčeta from the mathematical faculty started about the creating of the first CubeSat for Serbia, first scientific CubeSat. This is just the rendering, of course, because the project is still in this conceptual design phase. Mosaic is short of multi-purpose academic CubeSat. So what are CubeSats? CubeSats are small satellites launched into the orbit. And I would say that today even Serbia has the capacity of launching such satellites. The procedure of really launching the satellite is probably one of the hardest or simply most expensive, because in cases when a country doesn't have a launch facility, the only solution is that you buy this just as a you know procedure that will do some other country. What are the main ideas and goals of this small satellite? The idea is that, let's say the main idea, I listed here a lot of things, but the main idea is that Serbia, if we want to have a space program, if we want to have the space agency one day, we really need to start with some smaller steps. We cannot say that we want to launch a satellite that is, 700 kilograms heavy or something like that. These satellites, the one that I showed you, are 10 centimeters wide, 10 centimeters in height, and in all three dimensions. So they are called CubeSats because they are small cubes. But they can be connected to, for example, 3 units or 6 units and so on, depending on what you want to put of instruments on that satellite. As I also asked in my question at the beginning, of course, I completely agree with our representative from the government that we really need to do this dissemination, and one of the things of this project is also dissemination and education. So there is of course, a scientific goal that we want to achieve. The solar cycle is something that is that lasts 11 years, and it's let's say well explored for now. As you can see on this image, we are currently approaching the 25th cycle. Since we actually realized that the sun is going through these cycles, it's not the 5th since the beginning of the star of the sun, and you can see that the maximum of this solar cycle should be somewhere in July of 2025. So our idea was to launch a satellite equipped with a software X-ray spectrometer to actually observe and measure some parameters of the sun. And not just that, but also to do something that some would say even maybe daring, because satellites, when they encounter strong solar activity, strong solar winds, they are in danger. They are in danger of just shutting down or even some more complex failures. So what we want is to do some calculations according to the parameters that we collect from this small spacecraft. As I said, this is the scientific goal, but the other goal, which is also equally important, is education and dissemination. We want to include in this project, in the unit that I mentioned at the beginning for the space research and technologies, we want to make one big team of people from different areas in science, from the, for example, from the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering to the Faculty of Mathematics and Astronomical Observatory. So where we are with this project at this moment, so we founded the unit. I must say that this is completely in agreement with our government. We got all the permissions and everything that is necessary from the government, from the Ministry of Science, Technological Development and Innovation. So this was the first step to have it really clean on a paper. The next step is, of course, designing and making the CubeSat that we want. The idea is that the CubeSat is really made in Serbia, not to buy the finished product. And at this point also, we have some questions for the people of your branch, of your expertise. Like we were thinking when the CubeSat will be in some, because for now we have a design, but when we start making it, we were thinking about what are the regulations in a way that if somebody wants to launch a space mission, what are the bodies that govern this process, or something like that. The third step, as I mentioned before, is of course launching the satellite, and at this point we hope that we will just find the suitable partner for launching the satellite. Another step is receiving the data from the satellite. So if we launch something and we never hear from it anymore, then it's not a useful satellite. So, so we want to really have some info coming from there. Another idea is that these small satellites can also carry a camera. And we wanted to make the first images of Serbia from satellite. Of course, since we are talking about a small satellite, these are not high resolution images that can be used by military or something like that. We will try to just get some idea of how it looks like to work with data from satellites, how we can take some useful information from this, and how we can later use it for some other purposes. Like in the satellite industry today, it's very popular to use satellites, for example, for some disaster mitigation. If you have forest fires, like it was happening in Greece, they could monitor the spread of the forest fire from satellite. Then they launch drones, and they have even better picture how it is developing so that they can send firefighters and fight it. For the last slide, I have a lot of questions that can be raised at this moment. And one of the first things that I want to mention is that there is another memorandum of understanding coming up, possibility to sign this. Of course, I'm talking on governmental level. Our Ministry of Science and Technological Development should be the one to sign this memorandum of understanding with China, and it's for lunar research station. This is where I think we are coming really to the idea of today's talk here at the conference. So at this point, we would really like to hear your input on what are the necessary conditions to really achieve this. So it will not be signed by Astronomical Observatory, it will be signed by our ministry. And the observatory potentially would be one of the partners in this international lunar research station, because their idea is to form the station on the lunar surface, not necessarily manned by people, but for the beginning only by machines, by computers, so that you can do some research there. There is in astronomy, there was a big development in science when we received first rocks from the moon's surface. And it was helping us to determine how the moon and Earth formed. But a lot of questions still exist in astronomy and astrophysics, so we would like to have, some samples, maybe not brought to Earth, but to do some kind of measurements or experiments on the lunar surface in order to learn more about our solar system. So this is one general question that we can maybe discuss. And another one, of course, in the middle here, you can see the image of European Space Agency. We are, for now, advocating that Serbia should become the member of European Space Agency. Of course, there are, first some probably political reasons, then some funding problems that need to be solved in order to become the member. But we are confident that it will soon be reality in probably, let's say, next decade. And then another interesting thing is this satellite data. Since we don't have any agency that regulates how satellite data can be used, it's important that we start also this procedure and talks first with people who are really involved in this area of usage rights, how we can use images taken from satellites. Today, European Union offers free images of Earth's surface through a Copernicus program. China offers something similar, not always free, but there are some resources also from NASA, from Russian side. So some of the resources are, there. They just need to be used for the research and for the sake of common interest, as a previous speaker said. And of course, in this area, we want to make sure that we are following all regulations that are necessary to be followed if we want to do some kind of research with satellite data. I think that's all that I had for today's talk. Thank you very much for attention, and if you have any ideas, comments, suggestions, I'm here and open for discussion.
Many thanks. We have taken decision that discussion will be after the last speaker. We have the last speaker of our session, Mr. Valentin Uvarov. Are you here with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. You have a long title in the program. Probably in simple words, you might say, what is your position? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'd like to say that it's a great pleasure to participate in this conference. I'd like to greet my colleagues from Belgrade University and Moscow Institute of Foreign Relations, and to say that it's my pleasure to deliver this presentation. And it so happens that this very year, it is 40 years since I graduated from the law department of MGIMO University. I'd like also to say that before I was in the years of 2014, 2017, I was the director of the department in the United Rocket and Space Corporation. I was the head of the department for manned space complexes. At that very time, I also was a member of State Commission for conducting flight tests of manned space complexes. And so, in recent years, along with my work with the Council of Federation of Russian Parliament, where I am a deputy of expert council, I also work on problems of space debris removal. And so in this case, I'd like to say that my experience, that my former practical experience is always is like a shadow in all my research work concerning international law, and especially problems of space debris remediation. As for practical side of this problem, I'd like to inform my colleagues that several years ago, we established with my partners from the United States, Chuck Dickey, and from China, Wang Goyu, who is well known as a specialist in international space law. We established an organization which is called 300 Trusted Broker. And so this organization is going to organize the process of active debris removal. And this very year, it obtained a status of consultative status with Economic and Social Council of the UN. And at the last session of COPUS, we were nominated as observers of this UN body. So coming to the grain and coming to this very question of space debris, I'd like to stress that I will follow the recommendations of our esteemed keynote speakers. There were several questions concerning space debris problems during our conference. So it shows that this problem becomes more and more important, and it was proved by numerous reports during the International Astronomical Conference in Baku, which ended last year, and there were about 40 papers related to different sides of this problem. I refer to legal problems, I refer to organizational problems, and I refer to technical problems. I'd like to share my observations concerning this problem. And first of all, I'd like to demonstrate with these figures and this data how the problem we face now. So according to the different expert estimations, we have millions of objects of space debris in outer space. For the purpose of this report, I will tell you that I will majorly talk about space debris in LEO, low Earth orbit. That is the range between 200 and 2,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. So you see that according to these estimations, we have hundreds of millions of objects, small objects larger than 1 millimeter. So millions, or about 1 million, it depends of estimations. We have medium large objects about 1 centimeter. And larger, the most, I'd say, dangerous, tens of thousands. That is the objects of 1 centimeter size. Please, next slides. Thank you. So, and this case, I would like to cite the report of Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee. So you see that statistical models estimate more than 30,000 space debris objects larger than 1 centimeter in Earth orbit, and around 1 million objects larger than 1 centimeter. So you may imagine what problem these objects may cause. So as an example, I would say that if an object size of tennis ball would meet in the low Earth orbit traveling Tesla, you remember that very clever PR action of Elon Musk. So that would mean that this Tesla would be destroyed totally and wouldn't be able to continue its Star Trek. So, and some other figures. We, since the beginning of the space era, they were launched more than 10,000 spacecraft, and now in the orbit remains active about 6,000. So you may imagine that we have now in orbit about 3,000 inactive objects. I refer to former active spacecraft. Then we have approximately the same number of launches of rockets. So it means when this figure is important when we start talking about upper stages of which also became an object of space debris. So next slide, please. So when we are talking about the problem of space debris, we discuss how we can resolve this problem. And so space debris mitigation measures can be divided into two broad categories. Those that curtail the generation of potentially harmful debris in the near term, and those that limit their generations over the longer term. Next slide. So here we come to the legal problems. So we do not have internationally accepted binding definition. I would present to your attention two definitions. One definition, which is usually used when we discussing the problem of space debris in international venues, conferences, You may see it. And here I gave you a definition of Russian scientist, Boris Shustev, director of the Institute of Astronomy of the Russian Academy of Sciences. You may say that they are almost similar, but what I'd like to stress and to draw your attention to, that is, we do not have a binding definitions. We are, as lawyers, understand how important it is to have a definition internationally accepted that wouldn't provoke double meaning of any confusion in relations of future space debris remediation missions. So the same problem is with other with other technical problems. Excuse me. So there is a problem of definition of distance of safe approach. So there is also no definition, and you frequently read and mass media that there were some dangerous approaches. Sometimes it is 1 kilometer, sometimes it's 10 kilometers, and also we do not have international consensus about this problem. So let me ask you to turn on the next slide. The same problem is in general. We do not have no international mandatory specific regulations. We refer to major space treaties and agreements. There are, you see that, and you know, and during this very conference and in Baku, many reporters told us that we have to rely upon these treaties, but these treaties could not foresee the scope of the problem. And so we need to specify this problem. We need specific regulations. We also have different non-binding documents. First of all, the documents which were issued and agreed upon under the auspices of space debris mitigation guidelines. This is interagency debris committee. The latest example is the guidelines for the long-term sustainability of outer space activities of the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. But from the point of view of how important this problem, we may see that these documents are very, very general. And so please, next slide. Yeah. In comparison with the regulation on international level, I'd like to remind you that last year, Federal Communication Commission of the United States has adopted new rules requiring satellite operators in low Earth orbit to dispose their satellites within 5 years of completing their missions. And if we see how this topic is treated in the same space debris mitigation guideline, we see that there we have a 25-year period for such disposal. So we see that on the national level, these rules say become the countries on the national level are more active than the countries on the international level. So this is as for spacecraft. The same thing about specific rules on the national level is seen from the latest suggestion of the Federal Aviation Agency, of the USA, which proposed to require that operators dispose of all launch vehicle stages or jettison components in one of the several ways. There are 5 ways to dispose: control atmospheric disposal, heliocentric Earth escape disposal, direct retrieval, uncontrolled atmospheric disposal, high eccentric long-term disposal orbit. And each of these ways have different terms and period of times. So we see that the situation on the national levels somehow ahead of those situations when we see on the international arena. So another problem is determination of remediation or active debris removal. So at this situation, we can count on several approaches to debris removal. Spent upper stages and large spacecraft, fragments destroyed in a collision or a result of self-destruction, large and small, spent small spacecraft at an altitude up to 800 kilometers. And I'd like to inform you that up to the moment, we do not have any successful of active debris removal missions. The only 2 which are going to be completed next year, this is one of Astroscale, of international company with a head office in Japan, and another one is mission robotic vehicle of Northrop Grumman. And in this case, we may see problems because these operations could be treated by other states as operations of double use, or they also may be treated as a tool which could be used in time of warfare. I refer to the Astroscale mission. So in this case, the spacecraft approaches to the client and then the orbit. And in the case of mission robotic vehicle of Northrop Grumman, there's another way. A satellite of this mission approaches a client, attach a propellant or some special agent, and with this agent, this client would be disposed to the lower orbit. So you may say that also there are problems on this very stage. So please turn the next slide. So when we talk about mitigation and post-mission disposal, it means prevention, the creation of new space debris, and post-mission disposal. In this case, we could refer to the European Zero Debris initiative, which majorly focuses on the need of satellite self-deorbiting functions. But in this case, I also like to draw your attention that even on a European level, not all operators agree with such an approach, because during this conference, there was a report on part of the European Meteorological Satellite Organization, which clearly stated that it is not economically justified, and such a method couldn't be applied to big spacecraft, because in this case they would have to take on board a big quantity of fuel, and they would shorten the time of their active usage on their time, which this spacecraft could serve for these purposes. we have some definitions about space debris mitigation in such documents like International Standard Organization. There are 2 examples: Space Systems, Space Debris Mitigation Requirements, Space Systems, Detailed Space Debris Mitigation Requirements for Spacecraft. So here we come to conclusions. We know that this problem is very, very important now, but I dare to say that nobody think about how it could be dangerous. That's why I would stress that the current development of events may lead to such a situation that space debris may become either an apple of discord or a bone of contention. And the nuances of the biblical plots are not so important here, as it's essential that before we witness the Kessler syndrome, a domino effect may begin in relations to established system of international law. Excuse me, maybe my esteemed colleague would think that I exaggerate a little bit of this problem, but it proves my idea that we have to draw more attention and to start on the international level talking about the importance of this problem. And in this regard, I would like to cite the idea expressed in one of the reports at the International Astronomical Congress last week. And it's very interesting. The idea of the tyranny of small decisions can be applied to the topic of space debris. While none of the stakeholders acquiring benefits from orbital activities aims to purposely accumulate debris, the absence of appropriate incentives to take responsibility for them engenders the small choices that are rational on an individual scale, yet result into undesired outcomes. So, and the last stage, as for recommendations.
I'm sorry, Valentin, your time is already over.
You may see these recommendations. I just finished it with one sentence. A joint cooperative project for active removal of space debris could become a new Soyuz Apollo. That's the answer to Mr. Berkman, who drew our attention that in such a time, we continue cooperation in space, despite all other problems. So, thank you very much, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you. So, we do not have much time for discussion, but still we have. So, questions or comments from the audience?
There was already a question from...
Yes.
Yeah, I had a question.
Microphone.
I had a question for Milan Stojanović. You previously mentioned that funding is a problem of Serbia not participating in and not having an advanced space program. And I want to hear your opinion. How would the representatives of our country maybe convince the foreign investors or other countries to invest in particularly our space program?
Thank you for that question. Well, it's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a simple answer. But first, I want to stress that first our government is working on this budgeting. Then there is always opportunity of making more projects here in our country that are connected between science and industry, which is very important, and this is one of our goals for this unit. And then the next step would be to somehow approach the other foreign investors to our country. But the projects like the one that I mentioned, which I hope that our ministry will sign, the MOU with the China, is something where we can really look forward in this bigger capital, not just in funding, but also in knowledge. Because if we develop projects, such big projects like International Lunar Station together with China and Russia, who are the main leaders in this project, we will for sure improve the general investment in science and in Serbia in general.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a sort of comments. When you say that the only solution is to buy, I would correct you. Not, of course, the practice of international agreements show that there might be other solutions. You mentioned just one, but I would say that there was time when the United States applied to the Soviet Union for an agreement, because United States at that time did not have technical capabilities to launch, and that was arrangement between two countries. So it is possible. For instance, you are interested in that your satellite be here. The partner might be interested in sharing information from your satellite. United States, I'm sure, have all, so to say, sites of your country and so on and so forth. But there might be other countries, other options, and of course we might continue that. More questions?
Two hands, please. Online.
Yes, online. I see there are two hands. Yes, please.
So I have a few comments concerning presentations of Milan and answers to his question. First, you made to launch your satellites choosing among different countries who are specializing in launching small satellites. This is Russia, China, India, and United States. It is your own risk how you will develop this small spacecraft. The only necessary thing that you will have to discuss the adoption system in order to launch this satellite in a cluster launch. Then, if we are talking now about cooperation among legal specialists of Russia and Serbia. And in this case, I would recommend you to talk with one of the Russian companies who works in just this very field and has different agreements with different universities throughout the world to launch such satellites. I would easily could connect you. This is my comments, and I wish you all success. This is the start and a good start.
Thanks. Other questions, comments? There are some others from this format.
There is another one from the audience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I just want to greet the organizers. This is a really great opportunity to talk. I am Professor Djordje Čantrak from Faculty of Mechanical Engineering, University of Belgrade. And we work together with colleagues from astrophysics and in near future, colleagues from School of Electrical Engineering here in Belgrade on the projects like CubeSat and the other things. So we find that this is very, very important for all of us to boost these kind of ideas and projects. And this is very important for our country to be involved in the space community, because this is one of the high-tech possibilities for us. So just wanted to greet you all, and I wish you a successful conference, and thank you for this opportunity to be included in this conference.
Thank you very much. Other hands?
No more. Hands.
Okay. From the audience, yes, please. Michael.
I have
A question for Valentin Uvarov. When talking about legal aspects in international law concerning space debris removal, as far as I've understood, there is no binding documents, no strict definitions, and always quote-unquote general talks. Is there any way right now to enforce some rules or punishment for bad behavior by an international court? And in your expert opinion, is there any way to or possibility to create such a treaty on a global scale that would apply to all applicants?
No. The only example we have last month on the national level, when Federal Communication Commission fined a space operator named Dish for $150,000. So on the national level, no. That's why I stress the necessity to establish an international body. There are different options. For example, one expert referred to the ICAO, but my opinion, we need a specialized organizations. Moreover, we need a pilot project to unite national efforts in order to dispose the most dangerous objects that are upper stages and spacecraft. And these objects are listed in Dr. McKnight paper, and you may easily find out there. And there are mainly Russian upper stages, but at the same time, we refer to the spacecraft constellations, and they are majorly of the United States origin. So that we have both to work to clean and to preserve at least this part of the space. I refer to solve this common human heritage. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to be able to explore natural resources on other celestial bodies, because we won't have access, or we won't have a possibility to place on the lower orbit special spacecraft in order to follow these missions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that Professor Gajic might have a comment to this important issue. Yes.
Yes, of course. I heard very well your question and your previous question. And I have to say a few general issues. When we speak about international affairs, frequently we have to forget about international courts, because there is no court jurisdiction over those issues. No space treaty provides jurisdiction of any court, and that would be very, very dangerous to put in the hands of the judges to create the international space law. That will be unacceptable for all states on the earth. The second one, conclusion of some treaty, for example, concerning the space debris. There are certain guidelines, and I think at the level of the current international cooperation, that's the maximum. We don't have, and it's impossible to create some kind of international police or international police in outer space that will force, for example, major space actors to collect space debris, to fight against them, etc., etc. Here is the question of cooperation between states. If the states cooperate and identify some problem, they will solve that problem. But that takes a lot of time in the international arena. For conclusion of international treaties, few years is, let's say, a very short period. You can't do much in that period. But if you want to be informed about achievements in that field, I would like to recommend you to read reports of the Committee for Peaceful Use of Outer Space, and those reports contain a lot of information of your interests, and of course they direct to certain other sources. You have to go through in order to have a clear answer.
Excuse me, Mr. Berkman raised the hand, our speaker.
Yes.
So, Mr. Berkman, you raised the hand, so you can have a floor.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to respond to the discussion here in relation to the question about economics and funding to Serbia for space program, but in follow up particularly in the leadership from Valentin Uvarov. I would use as an analogy the law of the sea. A small country, Malta, with Arvid Pardo as the ambassador, introduced into the United Nations the concept of the common heritage of mankind. It wasn't a large nation, it was a small nation. It wasn't a powerful nation, but it was a good idea. And the issues of addressing space debris is a good idea. There are common interests, clearly, among all nations in terms of the use of outer space and addressing issues of space debris. A country like Serbia could take leadership in introducing into international law strategies associated with space debris, and in so doing, place Serbia in a position that would attract investment because of its leadership with outer space. It doesn't have to be a leader in terms of space technology. It could be a leader in terms of the use of outer space for peaceful purposes. And that's important. And that such leadership can come from any nation on Earth.
Thank you, Professor Berkman. One last question or comment, because we do not have more time. We are exhausted. Excellent. So thank you very much. Thank you for all our speakers. Thank you for those who participating in discussion, and thank you very much for the audience, because of course your presence here is already a success. Once again, my congratulations to the Belgrade University, and goodbye.